President Bush yesterday insisted he is a credible messenger on the war because he reads the intelligence. That answer rendered obscenely ironic today in our fourth story on the countdown. The Senate Intelligence Committee releasing two reports from the National Intelligence Council, both given to the White House in January 2003, both having predicted virtually everything that did go wrong would go wrong, meaning President Bush knew 2 months before he invaded that he might very well create what he says now is America's greatest threat, Al-Qaeda in Iraq, and that he would spur rather than discourage WMD programs in other countries. The reports were presented as assessments of the entire intelligence community, both warning of drawn-out factional violence in Iraq, but both also including multiple warnings that Mr. Bush failed to share with the American public as we contemplated war, many of which refute his arguments then and since about the value of his war, specifically that it would increase global support for Islamic terrorists and militant Islamic groups seeking political power. It would lead Al-Qaeda to accelerate anti-U.S. operations. It would help Al-Qaeda recover in Afghanistan. It would give Al-Qaeda new allies around the world, including Iraq. It would enable Iran to expand its influence in the region and improve relations with Syria, and rather than discourage hostile regimes from seeking WMD, quote, states with developmental WMD programs would try to increase the secrecy and pace of those programs with the hope of developing deterrent capabilities before they could be preempted. And despite Mr. Bush's promise that a free Iraq will spur regional democracy, the report also told the White House specifically that Iraq probably would not by itself be a catalyst for regional change. Its value as an example, quote, would depend heavily on U.S. success in ensuring that a new Iraqi government was not seen in the region as primarily a U.S. creation. Let's turn now to P.J. Crowley, who served as Special Assistant to President Clinton on National Security Affairs and is now a Senior Fellow at the Center for American Progress. P.J., thanks for some of your time tonight.
Always a pleasure, Keith.
It's not merely that this report warned about exactly the things that have come to pass, sectarian violence, terrorist co-opting of the political schisms in Iraq, but it also suggested ways to mitigate these things, utilize the lower ranks in Iraq's army, and engage with Iran. This is intelligence. Could this just have been overlooked, or did it have to have been deliberately ignored?
Well, remember that these guys expected a cakewalk, so they discounted both the available intelligence and also they discounted the need for planning of the post-invasion phase of the operation. And as you say, the two big winners as we sit here right now because of the decision to go to Iraq, one is Al-Qaeda and the other is Iran.
And looking forward to what the president is saying now, what he said yesterday at the news conference about the future, these 2003 forecasts are right. What does that mean for Mr. Bush's claims about what the war's benefits will still ultimately be?
Well, the president may well be talking about victory, but I think they are dramatically scaling back what that means. Rather than a transformed Middle East, I think they'll be very happy when we depart Iraq sooner or later. It's alive, breathing, and barely functional. So while they will be talking the good game, we obviously have the benchmarks, we have the surge results that will come in September, but I think largely we have lost the ability to influence events in Iraq. Heck, we'll be hard-pressed to actually get the parliament just to remain in session during the summer, much less pass the legislation necessary to begin a meaningful reconciliation process.
As these advertised advantages continue to fall away, the president is left with and continues to use the terrorism scare. He used the references to Al-Qaeda 19 times yesterday, and he uses the example of Iraq democracy. But was he not warned in these documents 4 years ago that a lengthy war and a lengthy presence in Iraq would make those very promised outcomes that much less likely?
Well, he was warned that, but you got to remember the infamous mission accomplished speech on May 1st was the trigger for a very significant and expected reduction of forces because they thought once they knocked off Saddam, the rest of Iraq would be self-ordering. And obviously we know tragically that's not true. There were a number of outcomes that they stated were the objectives for the mission, but they said WMD, but we didn't secure the weapon sites. They said democracy, but we excluded the experts from the State Department who actually do nation building. They said terrorism, but they didn't seal the borders so that we would prevent the infiltration of Al-Qaeda into Iraq as has happened. We were left with Saddam Hussein. That's the one thing they got right, but it's obviously, as the president said, a catastrophic success.
The occasion of the Memorial Day weekend is especially a somber one, even to ask this question, but is there a way to estimate how many lives were lost, how many just American families suffered because these CIA forecasts were ignored by the president and the warmongers who were around him?
I mean, tragically, these are quantifiable things. We're coming up on 3,500 service members killed, more than 25,000 service members seriously wounded. You know, the Iraqis themselves lose that amount in a month. They've suffered more than 100,000 casualties since we invaded 4 years ago. As the Iraq Study Group said, this will cost $1 to $2 trillion before all is said and done. Remember, Larry Lindsey was fired for saying it would cost $200 billion. So at the end of this, not only have we not succeeded, have we not achieved our objectives, but as the President acknowledged this week in his speech at the Coast Guard Academy, we have actually now faced a much more foreboding threat, largely of our own making.
P.J. Crowley, the Center for American Progress. As always, great thanks for joining us.
A pleasure, Keith.
The presidential